I'm going to go over the replacing and or adjusting of the rotating and stationary blades for a TT2000 cutter assembly. Before I get started on showing you how to replace and or adjust the blades, this is a brand new cutter assembly with everything already lined up. It is very critical that the rotating blade is right up against but not touching the stationary blade. The width of that, or the clearance basically, is less than 1/1000th of an inch, or the thickness of a ticket. So as you can see, the rotating blade is right up against but not touching the stationary blade all the way across from the one side to the next. It is also very important that they are lined up. You don't want to have a gap on one side compared to the other, because what it will happen, it will pinch the ticket instead of cutting the ticket. So what we can do now is we'll go over replacing the blades. First thing I do is take a small flathead screwdriver and remove the retaining ring. Then you lay the cutter assembly. It's always a good idea to do it on a flat surface. And what I'll do now is loosen the set screw for the small gear and loosen the set screw for the rotating blade. Now you can remove, sometimes you have to remove them a little more. And also, when replacing and or adjusting the stationary and or rotating blade, be careful. They are very sharp and you don't want to wind up with a band-aid like I currently have. And that should just slide right off of there. Some of them fit a little bit snugger than others, so it's not a big deal. And then you can just remove that. I always find it better to leave the flywheel on there, because you have that as a handle. Again, it's up to you. You can remove the flywheel, but we find removing the gears better. And these are new blades, so what we're going to do is just work on turning them. So this is the existing edge. You take the current edge and turn it. Then you just take your cutter shaft, put it through there, take your new blade, put the new blade on, slide that all the way through. You want to take the flat washer, put it up against there, the small gear on there as well. Now also notice the flat part of the shaft, and here I want to remove this as well. It's very critical that all the set screws are tightened down on the flat part of the shaft. So when lining that back up, what you can do is, before you put the small gear back on, make sure the flat part is pointing towards you. Push it all the way flush up against the bearing. And now you want to tighten it down. And what you can do now is you can see the set screws are lined up properly, so before you tighten the rotating blade down, you want to make sure that that is also lined up with the other two set screws. You can use those as a guide. And before tightening it down, you want to make sure it's centered on the shaft. Then you just tighten that down. You can take the retaining ring and push it back on. Or clip it back on. And now that's the turning and or replacing of a rotating blade. The stationary blade, you can just lay it down as well. Remove the number 6 socket head cap screws. And we are simply going to turn them. And here are your two set screws for the adjustment of the stationary blade. Turning them clockwise pulls closer, counterclockwise pulls it further away. You never really need to do that. You always want the blade right up against but not touching the rotating blade. So we're just going to turn this. If you were replacing the blade, you would just put a new one on. You can mark the edge if you want, so you know for the future that you haven't used the other side. And then you simply just tighten these back. Now, if you were to be replacing the rotating and stationary blade and an adjustment needed to be made at that point, or over the course of time as the rotating blade wears down, you will need to adjust the stationary blade. That can be done at this point, where you can simply use your index finger, press up against it, and then turn these two clockwise, and what will happen, that will adjust the blade closer, and you want it right up against but not touching the rotating blade, as you can see here, just like when we started this video. And then you simply just hand tighten these down. You don't need to over crank them. Hand tighten them is fine. And then you can see where I actually adjusted that, which is kind of good, and that's too tight. So we can go over how you can compensate for that. You can just loosen, and on the one side it's fine, on the other side it's tight. At this point you can just back off the set screw a little bit, and you can see now where it's spinning. And now you just tighten that back down, and your blades are adjusted properly. And now your blades are adjusted properly. And you know that when you can turn the blades and it's not rubbing up against it. If it is hitting it, again, like we shown before, what you can do is just back off the set screw just a little bit, even with it tightened down, but you don't want to crank too much because you could break the set screw, but you do have to be able to back it off just enough.